Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to Ask TotalBiscuit Anything Director's Cut, in which I repeat and expand upon the questions that were asked to me during my AMA over on Reddit on the 29th of September 2012. So let's continue from where we left off and deal with the next question on the list. Comes from CJ Sharon that says, in your opinion, what genre of game is making the best games at this point in time, and what genre would you like to see revitalized? Well, I think we're probably in a phase where the best platformers we've ever seen are actually coming out, so this is a great benefit to anyone that likes that particular genre. There's so many indie companies that are developing platformers based on one particular puzzle, gimmick, or mechanic, and if you're a platformer fan, then even compared to the SNES and Genesis days, you've never really had it better. So that's a genre that is doing incredibly well, and I think you're probably getting the best platformers that have ever been made. And I suppose that also carries over to the puzzle genre as well, because there's quite a bit of overlap there. Puzzle platformer is the thing right now. You can definitely thank Jonathan Blow for that with Braid. Every indie company and their mother now trying to make games like that. Now, when it comes to a genre that needs to be revitalized, I think a lot of people are expecting me to say MMOs, but no, actually, I don't care that much about MMOs. What I care more about is actually RTS, real-time strategy. Right now, we have a really horrible situation with this genre. It's in a pretty dire state. Company of Heroes 2 is on its way out, and it's mostly a traditional RTS, but there's still unlocks and nonsense like that, which I really don't like. But I've got to ask, where on earth have all of the base-building RTSs gone? We've got StarCraft 2, and that's really about it. Other releases are going down the route of Ground Control, which is a game that had no base and you were focusing on your troops, but honestly, I don't even think that qualifies as real-time strategy. That's more real-time tactics. I think if you're going to do RTS, you've really got to have those traditional elements of base building within them. And honestly, if you don't, then it actually takes a good deal of interesting stuff out of the game. The idea that you have to assault a base that your opponent created is a really interesting piece of gameplay. You have attack defense, you have siege warfare, you have the idea of creating some huge defensive buildings. I just like to compare an RTS that doesn't have any base building in it to something like Supreme Commander, or more accurately, Total Annihilation. Think about the amount of defensive structures you could build there. You could have shields, you could have ECM, you could have radar dampening stuff, missile defense, and all manner of different turrets, including massive artillery pieces that could fire across the map. That's cool. That is really interesting, and you can't have any of that if you don't actually have any base building. So I despise the fact that a lot of modern RTS are designed in such a way that you don't have this base building. And there are arguments like, oh, well, build orders, and we don't want people to have to learn build orders and things like that. No! People don't care about that necessarily. If you're going to be competitive, then you're going to have to learn some pretty advanced stuff anyway. If you want to play casually, you don't need to know build orders. Just build whatever the hell you want. It's fine. And I really don't think that people are as bothered by that as some companies seem to believe. I'm hoping that with Planetary Annihilation back on the way, we will hopefully get a resurgence of this. And of course, there are elements of it in Company of Heroes 2 as well, even if it does contain some objectionable stuff, which reminds me very much of C&C 4. I am concerned about that, to say the least. I think there are many interesting places that the genre can go that do not involve removing elements of it. You can very much have an RTS that uses the traditional model but expands upon it, utilizing some new ideas. Like, I don't think the idea of utilizing physics has been used all that much within RTS so far. There have been a couple of games. Perimeter had some terraforming aspects in it, and Elements of War, which was an RTS, I think a couple of years ago, by Calypso, that involved affecting the weather in order to use that as a weapon, but it ended up being somewhat gimmicky. I think there are plenty of ideas that you can use there, but you've got to go back to the old idea of make a base, produce units from it, and design that base in such a way that you can actually defend it. I very much miss that idea. I really, really do. So I'm hoping that we get more of that coming in the next few years, and if not, well, I guess our hopes reside entirely on Planetary Annihilation then. Icarus Taylor asks, given unlimited resources and unlimited time, what game would you make? And my answer to that was a bit sarky. Deus Ex 2, because there was no Deus Ex 2. And technically that's correct. It wasn't actually called Deus Ex 2. There's no Deus Ex 3 either. It was called Human Revolution. But Deus Ex Invisible War was a huge, gigantic disappointment. I would like to see a proper sequel. Now, I would say that Human Revolution did some things well, certainly, but it also had some elements that I really, really did not like. I think I would just like to revisit every single concept that Deus Ex did and do it better in a modern engine. You know what the sad thing was? I never even finished Deus Ex Human Revolution. I probably got bored about 20 hours in, and I think it was mostly because I could get everything, and I was able to hack every single door, and it became obvious that the way that the game rewarded you for certain tasks encouraged a certain style of play. Shooting people generally wasn't the best idea. You got more experience from knocking them out, but that wasn't difficult because there were all sorts of non-lethal weapons that you could use. Using non-lethal in the original Deus Ex was much, much more challenging. I also think they maybe went completely OTT with the whole superhuman thing. The way the melee system worked was just silly. I absolutely hated that. But there's stuff like the ability to blow everything up in the room with the Typhoon system. I don't want a smart bomb. I want to have to think about a way to deal with all of these enemies in a room. I don't have to have an I win button in order to make that happen. I find it far more interesting to do cool stuff like stick poison mines on a wall, tempt them out, stack up a bunch of explosive crates, blow them up, do all sorts of cool stealth stuff, and I don't think Human Revolution had quite as much of that. It was a worthy successor, certainly, but I think I want a true sequel to Deus Ex based on what happened in the original game as opposed to a prequel. And I don't think Invisible War really did that all that well. It had very small, limited environments. It had the whole universal ammo system. And I don't really mind some of the thematic elements of Invisible War. I think they're really quite awesome. But because the game didn't really deliver them in a good way, it just feels like, to me, they just need to make a Deus Ex 2 that actually works properly. I would actually kind of like to see the current team that did Human Revolution take on the plot of Deus Ex 2 and think about how they could best make that happen. I don't think it would be perfect, certainly, but yeah, it's difficult to say if you can even replicate the magic of Deus Ex. I think for most people, they probably think I'm looking through this in a very nostalgic way, but I go back and play Deus Ex every now and again, and as I've explained in previous videos where I'm doing big in-depth stuff on that game, there are so many aspects of it that just take it above and beyond the traditional game. I don't want to talk too much about this because I know for a fact there's a question later on that asks me about Deus Ex again, so I will not go too in-depth. But yeah, if I was given unlimited resources and unlimited time, I would make another Deus Ex game, and hopefully it would be fantastic. But it probably wouldn't be, because I have a feeling that that was a case of lightning never striking twice. From Malicious Magician, do you ever get approached in public by fans? If so, what was the best time? Well, yes, it actually does happen. It depends on where I am. It doesn't really happen much around here, needless to say, and that's actually something of a benefit. But if it's in other countries, parts of the US, or of course at events, yeah, I do get approached quite often. Probably the best one was actually in a restaurant in Sweden after DreamHack. Turns out the waiter was a fan of the channel, and as such, random dishes just kept appearing that we weren't charged for. I was not exactly too unhappy about that. No, indeed not. Yeah, I mean, I do run into people every now and again, but it's not amazingly common. Certainly not in public. I think when you go to a gaming convention, obviously loads more people are going to know who you are. If you're walking around in public, no, not so much. Depends where you are. I mean, in Sweden, when I was walking around nearby some of the universities, I had some people stop me because they recognized me, but inside the actual town itself, not so much. And you can tell that it's very much a demographic thing. You've got students that are very computer savvy that watch the channel, and you've got average people that don't. It's kind of cool nonetheless. It's very difficult to get used to, certainly, and I will talk about that later in another question, but it does happen from time to time, and it never gets normal. Another one from Icarus Tyler. How did you settle on the name TotalBiscuit and Cynical Brit, for that matter? Have you ever considered alternatives? Well, TotalBiscuit is from a Terry Pratchett novel called Carpe Jugulum, and the full quote goes something along the lines of this. Well, we did once have a king called My God He's Heavy the First, said Nanny, and the beer's been on for the last couple of hours, so basically you'll get a cheer whatever you say. Besides, thought Agnes, I know for a fact there's people out there called Silfody Wilson, Yodel Lightly, and TotalBiscuit. Total Space Biscuit between the names, so I don't go by Total Space Biscuit. I always refer to Total Space Biscuit as an asshole. I mean, he's out in space, he's just being a cocky son of a bitch, but whatever the case, I am TotalBiscuit with one word and capitalized T and capitalized B there. But the whole quote comes from this naming ceremony. I think it was Clatchian, if I recall correctly, but it's been such a long time since I actually read Carpe Jugulum, which I would highly recommend, by the way. It's a great book by a great author. And it was all about the idea that after a certain point, the first words that are said actually end up becoming part of the name, such as this one here. His full name is James What the Hell's That Cow Doing in Here, Poor Chick. That kind of thing. It's intriguing, one way or the other. It's kind of lampooning naming ceremonies from various different cultures. It's pretty cool. Cynical Brit comes from Blue Please's original intro, which said something along the lines of, "Ladies and gentlemen, do not be alarmed. A cynical Brit has been allowed on the air with a microphone. You will listen, or this kitten we have hostage will be forced to fight a giant badger. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Please. Enjoy." I believe that was the original intro. That was before the whole dark with the skies and chill was the wind nonsense. Yeah, we were a little bit less ostentatious at that point, I think. But yeah, the Cynical Brit has been a moniker for so long. It's been a alternative term. It's always been tagged on to TotalBiscuit, the Cynical Brit, and then referred to as that. And yeah, that was all the way through Wire Radio. So it made sense when I created the brand to use something that already existed, and that was cynicalbrit.com. Have I ever considered other names? Funnily enough, I didn't actually answer this in the AMA. I must have missed it. I was answering a lot of questions, so I guess I just skipped over it. But I don't think I have. I mean, there are some people that would argue, well, it's unprofessional and you won't get very far in the industry like that. And my response to that is saying, no, actually, what medium am I trying to appeal to? Which one? Oh, well, you can never get into television doing that. I don't want to be in television. Television sucks. You kidding me? Why would you want gaming on TV? It's just so stupid. Media on the internet is the thing now. Streaming media, video on demand, and the ability to find the exact niche that you enjoy is the internet and is media in a nutshell, and it's where we're going in the next 10, 20 years. And yes, people may very well refer to themselves by their pseudonyms to make that happen. So where are the standards? Which standards are we applying here? We're applying broadcast standards? I wouldn't say that some broadcast standards really apply to this particular industry. There are arguments that it would apply to esports, for instance, because we want esports to be the legitimate sport, and as such, we shouldn't be calling ourselves by usernames and things like that, but I also feel that it actually gives character very much to the industry itself and this particular scene and niche. So I don't think I've really considered any other names. I mean, some people say that my actual real name, John Bain, is good enough, and yeah, it's a pretty cool name. You know, I can hardly object to it, but I think people know me by TotalBiscuit, people know me by the Cynical Brit. It's a brand. There's no point dismantling the brand for no obvious benefit. I think if I were to ever change it and go for the whole real name thing, I'd need to see some fairly substantial evidence that it would be beneficial. I don't really mind referring to myself as that, and people that meet me usually just refer to me by TB anyway, which is nice and easy, and it's only one letter away from what they would have said otherwise. JB, TB, and it's easy, it's not a problem. The only issue is, of course, being mistaken for tuberculosis, but there you go. We all have our little problems. Lodelica says, have you regretted making this Ask Me Almost Anything so far? Yeah, by this point, and this was actually about only halfway into the AMA, my fingers were really hurting. And it turns out if you type that many things that quickly, yeah, it tends to cause that to happen. I don't think anyone's really surprised by that. And I also type really hard. I've noticed that I really strike keys pretty forcefully, and I think after a lot of fast typing that really gets to you. It's been actually a very long time since I've had to type a good deal for a great period. Like my original job involved doing quite a lot of that when I worked at a financial advisory, and I've done data entry and all sorts of other terrible things prior to this. You know, everyone's had terrible jobs. It's as simple as that. I think that it's a bit of a character building experience, but at the end of the day, you got to pay your dues and all that. So I don't really feel all that guilty for having this job now, because I have done years and years and years of terrible jobs. I have paid my damn dues. It's fine. Anyway, I usually just speak into a microphone, and that is easier. It's less painful. And people often ask me, how do you keep your voice in shape? And it's a simple answer. Drink a lot of water. Constantly. There are other casters that use, like, warm tea and honey, or hot water and honey and things like that. And, yeah, I suppose that would work too, but always cold water, always still, never fizzy. Carbonated drinks do horrible things to you. Not only do you obviously burp an awful lot if you happen to have carbonated drinks, which is terrible during a cast, but they also do nasty things to your throat. And energy drinks, don't even think about it. Absolutely not. Never energy drinks. Also a case of keeping your voice at a fairly consistent level and just learning to support with the diaphragm and not with the lungs. The lungs are designed to filter the air. They are not designed to store it. The diaphragm is designed to store it. So learn to breathe with the diaphragm. You'll have a lot of air behind it. You won't be straining your voice so much, and you won't bust your vocal cords or just blow your voice out over a long period. That's the only advice that I can really give. I don't think I'm a professional voice coach by any stretch of the imagination. Most of this was trial and error, so there you go. As for the AMA itself, no, I absolutely don't regret it. It's turned into a finite series here, which is good, and obviously it's making money for the channel, and it's bringing views in. That's the nature of the business. That's what I'm supposed to do. I'm out of a job if I can't do that. But more to the point, it's really nice just to be able to interact with fans and answer questions, and when I use the word fans in this instance, I'm doing so fondly. I think I'm making a distinction now between fans and fandom, spelled D-U-M-B, and these people who have posted questions here are fans and viewers, and they want to know more about me, and that's very, very flattering. It's ridiculously flattering. I think it's hard not to be humbled by the idea that someone is really interested to know about your opinions on something in your daily life, so I do not regret doing the Ask Me Anything for a second, and hopefully you guys are enjoying it, either through the text AMA or this incredibly long series of videos, the AMA Director's Cut. Let's move on. I think this one's probably going to take a while, so we'll do this as our last one for the day. This one comes in from Tuzor that says, on average, how long does it take you to plan, record, and upload your videos? Well, honestly, it kind of depends on the video. WTF is the easiest thing that I do because it's just a live video. So if I screw up and lose my train of thought, I'll usually just start the whole thing again. So that can be time-consuming. But aside from that, it's just I play the game, I live demo it for 30 minutes, and I talk over it. However, what I will say is that WTF does take some research and groundwork. I usually won't do a game completely blind. I'll look up the developer's history. I'll search around to see if there's any technical problems and solutions that are affecting people. That's pretty important. You've got to mention that every now and again where possible. Obviously, you can't do it when it's a pre-release game because no one else actually has access to it. But if the game's out and people are reporting widespread technical issues that you aren't having, then you've really got to mention it because some people do use WTF as a buyer's guide, and they should, but they shouldn't use it in a vacuum. I feel that doing a live demo is useful. It can get people interested in the game, it can point out some fairly obvious problems, and it can give an overall reasonable first impression, but it's never as good as reading a full-on review, and you should always, always take WTF with a pinch of salt in that regard. Definitely take it alongside other content and use it as part of your research, not the sole part of it. But I do try at least to inform people on that kind of stuff, and I do search to try and find that information prior to it. Also things like trying to find out how long the game is, if that's at all possible, and other related issues that would be good to mention. You know what, also, by the way, this is just a tangent, but issues is the right way to pronounce it. That is the English way to pronounce it. We don't do issues. Alright, now I've got some issues here, or the American one. I'm not going to try an American accent. That's pretty terrible. Issues. I hate it, and it is the American pronunciation, issues, but no, issues. Tissues, not tissues. I'm going to wear me tissues. I'm going to go out in the town. Please. Now what I'll also do is I'll usually play through the tutorial stages because they're usually not very interesting to watch at all. I like to actually get to the real gameplay. Some of these tutorials drag on for ages, so if I start doing WTF and I do it from the very start of the game and it's 30 minutes of tutorials, then that pisses everybody off. So getting past that is always good. AAA WTF always takes longer because I'll usually play for a good few hours first. These games are usually longer, more in depth, and they are slower burning. They take a while to get going. Tutorials can last upwards of 2 hours, as we saw through Borderlands. Ugh. God. So usually the video is always going to be longer as well because there's a lot more to talk about. People make remarks about a bias that I supposedly have against AAAs, and it's like, oh, why are you so critical of AAAs? It's because they have to be criticized more in depth. They're more deep games. There's more to talk about, and as a result, you're going to come up with more criticism as well as more positive remarks to make. When you make a simplistic $10 game versus a multi-million-dollar, $60 title with DLC and sequels and all sorts of crazy stuff going on it, then yes, it does deserve a more in-depth look, and as far as I'm concerned, that's actually respecting the title rather than disrespecting it. That's the view that I take. On a good day, I'll crank out several WTFs, but that's fairly rare. It requires the right frame of mind, and critiquing game after game is difficult. It's really easy to lose your train of thought and forget the points you're going to make in the first place if you're playing too many games in one day. Plus, first impressions, I really can't write down a list of points because I'm probably going to discover stuff on the fly as I go through, and that I think is what is appealing to many people about WTF is I am able to discover things on the way and immediately react to them in a really honest fashion. You get my thoughts at the time, and it is directly related to what you're seeing on screen, so you can immediately make a judgment and assessment. So I find that to be very, very useful indeed, but it also completely annihilates the idea of putting down a framework on paper, because what's the point in a framework when I'm going to have to adapt it on the fly? As regards to Terraria, that takes a while with editing, and it also takes a while to get all of the files over. I mean, we're sending files from Jesse and back and forth and things like that, and it's a bit fiddly to sync up the video and the audio from two different people and do the actual proper cuts with it, but the actual recording itself is pretty easy to do because it's actually live. Usually there's quite a lot of pre-prep, like we'll try and empty our inventories, think about vaguely what it is we want to do. We don't generally have too much of a plan, and of course getting the server properly set up every time and getting everything working the way that it's supposed to. Now, when it comes to the mailbox, that's the one that takes the longest. I need to record gameplay footage beforehand and then do the research to make sure I can give an appropriate answer to all of the questions. For some reason, I always have to make way more cuts in Mailbox than anything else. I really don't know why. I think maybe it's because I'm not writing my answers down, but I'm coming up with points as I go, so more often than not, I have to pause, stop recording, and think of the next thing to say. Not only that, but sometimes I'll actually say something and think to myself, like, hang on, is that actually right? You know, I'd really better go and look this up just to make sure, and sometimes I'll find out, oh, actually, no, it wasn't, never mind. Seems like my assumption was incorrect there, but Mailbox does take an awful lot of time, and there are some questions where I just can't seem to fill that 5 minutes, and I'm thinking, what else should I say? I don't want to repeat myself too much. It's more challenging than you might think to come up with that kind of stuff. I generally do 2 to 3 videos a day, and it takes up the majority of my day. The rest of it's spent keeping up to date with new titles and gaming news, which is vitally important in my line of work. If I don't have that kind of knowledge and I don't keep bang on up to date with all of it, then my opinion becomes less and less relevant. Working with the rest of the company to get events and new game setups is always a big one, and also dealing with social media. I think that is part of the brand, that is part of who I am, that I do respond to people. So I think that is important and not just a time sink, but it does take up a lot of time. So I think if you think about all of that, you can clearly see where all the time actually goes on a daily basis. All right, folks, there you go. There is part 3 of my Ask TotalBiscuit Anything Director's Cut series. Just to remind people, this was based on an AMA I did over on r/CynicalBrit on the 29th of September. The questions have already been both asked and answered. I am simply expanding upon them and creating a video series based around it, because, let's be honest, nobody wants to read all of that. You kidding me? No. Alright, folks, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you're enjoying this, and I shall see you next time.